Good afternoon to everyone again. Thank you very much for being here and for sharing this hour with us. As I said at the beginning, I believe you are asking yourself, where's Sylvia? She says hi to everyone, but because of family matters, she could not be with us today. She said hi, she said have a nice time, and of course she will join us in the next HR International Talk that we will organize. I am Gloria. I'm part of her team, part of the headhunting team. So I'll be today presenting a bit the session that we have. I think there are people who have already joined us in the last two HR international talks that we organized, but we can do just a short introduction on what's international HR talks and on the two other sessions that we organized. So it's a new innovative format of presenting disruptive global HR trends with top speakers as Yusuf that we have today that will explain us the agile ways of working in HR every 2 weeks. It was actually an extension of the HR conference that Sylvia used to organize in Barcelona every year, but with the new ways of working and of course with all the digital world that we are living in, she decided to do these HR international talks every 2 weeks in order to share the insights of the global trends in HR. We did a first session on the insights of a recruiter or of a headhunter, our secrets. We shared them all with you. And then the second one was a very interesting one as well with Gustavo about metaverse and its implication in HR. And we will be talking today about the agile ways of working, how to start, where to start, what's the ultimate benefit from it. And Yusuf, of course, will share all his expertise with us. I'll do just a quick introduction of your experience, Yusuf, if you agree, so that everyone can get to know you a bit better. But of course, you'll explain better on your presentation. Yusuf has been in HR for the last 14 years now in different multinationals. First, he started in different consultancies such as Accenture and Deloitte in different HRBP roles, and then Vistaprint, Faster Horses, and now PepsiCo. You started in Barcelona, in our sunny Barcelona, and right now in France, leading different countries, Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, and leading the transformational projects there. Sylvia always says that you are the best person to explain agility, how to implement it, and to share all your knowledge with us. So we are all ears, we are all yours, and please share your experience with us.
Thanks, Gloria. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Really excited actually to talk about Agile with you guys. The session is going to be as interactive as possible, so feel free to ask your questions on the chat. I'll also have some questions for you. So this is by no means me presenting for the next hour. It's also going to be you actually co-creating some of the content. I'll start sharing my screen with you, and I'm going to introduce myself as well on my end, just to complete also what Gloria has mentioned. So what the session is going to be about, for those of you who have already actually really good knowledge of agility and agile, this session might be a bit of a disappointment because this is a one-on-one on agility and on agile. It's agile for teams that are new to agile. And so the main question that we'll answer today in the next hour is, let's assume that you're going to work with a team that has zero knowledge of agile and you don't know where to start. You don't know how to get them on board. So I'm going to give very practical tips in terms of first steps to take to actually start deploying agility and agile ways of working with the team. This is very important because if you're already a Scrum Master or an Agile coach, you might actually see things that are very familiar to you, and you can share also your experiences, which I would value. But also just setting expectations right from the beginning. It's going to be Agile for teams that are new to Agile. So in terms of a little bit my background and who I am as a person, you'll see a number of flags. Hoping you recognize almost all of them or all of them. I'm not going to ask you which countries you see there. I'm Belgian Turkish, which are the two flags that you see. Turkish parents, born and raised in Belgium, but I've lived in 5 countries so far, and which are the remaining flags that you see. So the US, Philippines, Spain. I spent 8 years in Barcelona, and now I'm in Paris, and I've been living in Paris for the last year and a half. I've been also in a number of companies. I started my career in consulting at Accenture and Deloitte, and then moved on to Vistaprint, which is now called Vista, a company that is well known actually for its agile transformation. So I've predominantly led an agile transformation and design thinking transformation at Vista. And obviously now at PepsiCo in PepsiCo France, specifically on a local HR role. I also had my entrepreneurial life at some point. Some of you might know, I actually co-founded a boutique consulting company named Faster Horses. It's a company that was specialized in agile and design thinking. And we partnered with mid-scale organizations to implement agility and design thinking. Was a great part of my career journey, honestly. I'm looking forward to doing some reminiscing, actually, some of the days that I spent on Agile at Faster Horses. So that's me in a nutshell. So let's get to know you a little bit. How would you define your personal knowledge of Agile? I'm going to ask you to use the chat functionality for this. So the first question is, what is Agile? If you're completely new, you have zero knowledge on agility. Second one is, I'm discovering Agile. My knowledge is mostly theoretical. 3, I'm applying Agile to projects and I'm still learning. 4 is, I'm proficient, I use Agile regularly. And 5 is, I'm an expert, I'm an Agile guru. So feel free to use the chat functionality with the number that best corresponds to your personal knowledge. Thanks, Zahari. We've got 3s, 2s. All right, so mostly between 2s and 3s, but I think we're more leaning towards 3 than a 2. So good, awesome. We do have one. Thanks a lot for the honesty. One person with a 1, which is really good. So the session is hopefully going to be helpful for you. Thanks, Peter. Got another person also with a 1. So all right, maybe 2 would be the right average.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. What I will do is, had anyone, by the way, answered 5, I would have asked that person to co-present with me for the next hour. So I myself actually, I'm not giving myself a 5 because I think there's so much to learn on Agile that I would give it myself a 4, because I'm also still learning on certain things around agility, even though I'm an Agile coach. So let's move on to a quick definition of what is Agile. I'm going to ask you, you can unmute or you can put it in the chat, but if you had to define Agile with one word or a couple of words, what would it be? If you had to define Agile with a couple of words or one word, what would it be? Moving fast.
Yeah. Okay.
Mindset, I like that one. Thanks, Teresa. Gloria, what else do we have in the chat? Do you mind?
Yeah, improvement, attitude, innovation, efficient way to work, think, transformation, co-creation.
Yeah. Co-creation is a good one. I like that one. Yeah. That's the line between Agile and design thinking.
Change, speed.
Yep. A lot of those are actually consequences of Agile or responding actually to a need. Thanks for sharing. Let's move on to a definition of what Agile is. So I really like actually using one word definition, because that's going to stick very easily with everyone. The one word, if you had to think of Agile, would be mindset. If you had to define Agile in one single word, it would be mindset. I'll explain why. Agile is nothing more than a set of values and principles that are focused on the delivery to the value to the customer. So what you're trying to do with Agile, it's basically following a certain set of values and principles that are defined in the Agile Manifesto, and that are essentially focused on delivering value to the customer. And it's really important, actually, the last piece, to the customer, is something that is super important in agility. everything that you do is in service of the end customer. So another way to say this, it's a philosophy, it's a mindset, it's things that would show actually in your behaviors. And this is super important because often we think about agile methodologies only, and we don't think about actually the mindset piece. So now that we understand it's a mindset, and it's clear enough that it's a set of values and principles, what does it concretely mean? And what is the difference then between doing agile and being agile? There is a difference between doing agile and being agile. Doing agile refers to all of the agile methodologies and tools that you might know. You may have heard some of those tools: Scrum, extreme programming, Kanban, Lean. Those are all agile methodologies, and these are processes and tools. What being agile is more focused on the mindsets. It's actually the underlying behaviors. It's the values and principles that you bring to the table. For example, in agile, it's absolutely important to co-create solutions with your end customer. That is a value, that is a mindset, that is as part of agility. The tools, therefore, are just means for you to get to that mindset. So let me ask you a question: what do you think is most visible to the naked eye? Is it doing agile or being agile? And you can use the chat functionality to answer the question.
Being agile, says Teresa.
Yeah. So what is mostly visible to the naked eye? Yeah.
Being agile, be going as well.
Interesting. Any additional answers, Gloria?
Doing agile, says Gabriella.
Okay. So what is mostly visible to the naked eye? It's actually doing agile. When you actually work with a team, the first things that you can observe directly are the tools and processes that they work with. What is a little bit more complicated for you to observe, it's the behaviors. You can observe them, obviously, but this is where you'll spend a little bit more time. And I'll give you specific examples. Is when you get into a team, the questions that you can ask are related to tools. For example, you can say, have you ever used any agile methodologies before? You can ask, have you used Scrum? Are you familiar with sprints? Are you familiar with Kanban or Lean? What tools have you utilized so far? Those are all questions around doing agile. The questions that are around being agile are related to the values and principles. Example, when was the last time that you talked to an end customer? How do you gather feedback on the things that you deploy? How do you make sure that what you're doing is actually working? Do you prototype and develop things on a small scale before expanding it and scaling it further? Those are all questions around being agile. Those are more related to behaviors and less around processes and tools. It's important to make that distinction because when you work with teams that are new to agile, you need to have a balance of both. Again, the tools are there to help you to get to being agile, and that's ultimately the goal that you want to achieve. The origins of Agile come from the Agile Manifesto. So the Agile Manifesto was written about 20 years ago by a group of software engineers. They all came together and they asked themselves the following question. They said, well, how can we actually better deliver working software so that it becomes actually more valuable to the end users? And they wrote the set of values and principles that I was referring to earlier on. This is what you see. This is as far as the Agile Manifesto reads. So it's literally a 2-pager. 4 values that you see here, and 12 principles. Thank you.
Okay.
And 12 principles that you can read as well. The one thing that you will notice is that there is a lot of software technology in the Agile Manifesto. So there are also other versions of the Agile Manifesto that are out there that can be suited for audiences that are beyond actually technology. just to better understand the audience today, how many of you, like, what is the function that you work in? So for example, if you work in HR, you can put HR or people or talents as a function in the chat. If you work in finance, you can put finance or legal, just to understand what's your background.
HR. First answers are HR, people and operations, HR, recruitment. Yeah, mostly our HR, I believe.
All right, we have.
Well, we have one sales and marketing from Tony.
All right, thanks, Tony. At least we have a bit of diversity, which is great in terms of profiles, at least.
Yep.
There is also the Agile People Manifesto and the Agile HR Manifesto. So if you're new to Agile and you look at this, you might think, this doesn't resonate with me because I don't deliver software. Know that there is also an Agile People Manifesto and an Agile HR Manifesto. You can find them very easily on Google. You can including find them actually in a different language. I see that most of the people who got connected are Spanish speakers. So there is also a Spanish version of the Agile HR Manifesto. The reason why this is important is one of the steps that you can undertake for teams that are completely new to Agile is to actually read the manifesto together. Because it's literally 2 pages, you can do this in a first meeting. So one of the tips and advices that I can give to a team that has never heard about Agile is to go through the manifesto together and ask them questions around what resonates with you? What are your thoughts? What do you think makes sense? How do you think our team scores against these? Where do you think we are at in terms of maturity levels? And engage in a conversation. So let me give a good example of what you can flag with the team. The principle number 10 says, simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. This is a question that is really interesting to ask in a team, and asking them whether they prioritize enough, whether they actually focus on the most important things. By show of hands, and or for those of you who don't have the camera on the chat, how many of you think that you're really good at this, your organization, prioritizing and deciding what not to do?
You can as well open your microphones if you want, if anyone wants to talk, or as you wish.
We have Martino who says, yes, really good at this. So that's good to hear. This is usually a pain point when we work with teams who are new to Agile. They often do not prioritize enough. So it's a really good question to ask, actually, like on a team, if you're helping a team, supporting a team that wants to go adopt more Agile ways of working, this is a good question to ask, to say, does everyone feel the same way? Do you all feel that we are prioritizing enough and deciding what not to do? So one concrete tip is, if you have a team that has zero knowledge of Agile, send the manifesto ahead of your meeting. If you work in HR, which seems to be the case for today's audience, send the Agile HR Manifesto to the team and read it together in a meeting and discuss it, especially. Where do you think you are against those values and principles? So let me ask you another question, and then we'll move into other practical tips. We have established that Agile is a mindset. We have also established that there is a difference between doing Agile and being Agile, and that the goal is being Agile. And then we've talked about concrete tips on the Agile Manifesto to get familiarized, to get the team familiarized with Agile. Question is, how do you recognize an Agile organization? You can unmute, or you can put actually some ideas in the chat. How do you know whether a team or an organization is embracing Agile ways of working?
Olga says when it's efficient.
When it's efficient, okay.
Adaptable, Begonia.
Yeah. Adaptable.
Time taken to decide and execute decisions. When decisions are taken quickly. Collaboration.
Yeah. Decision-making process is a good one.
Good, yeah.
Collaboration, obviously, how you collaborate with one another. Yeah. Anything else?
No, on the chat, no. I would say as well, co-creation, what we mentioned before.
Yeah.
Quick turnaround as well?
Yeah. So everything that has been mentioned are actually results of agility, are consequences of
Yeah.
agility. So then the question is, how do you actually make a diagnosis of where your organization stands on agility? You can look at outcomes and outputs, which are results, again, collaboration, decision-making process, all of those things. But actually looking back is on saying, what are the true agile behaviors that you want to see in an organization, or structurally the things that are out there? There are three laws or three principles in Agile. The first one is the principle of the small team. So basically, it's a team that is autonomous enough to execute on a priority. It's generally a cross-functional team, and that is aligned to a specific outcome. You may have heard of the terminology squad, for example, when you have a squad that is working actually in a small team. It is actually a cross-functional team that is aligned to an outcome. You usually have all the skills that you need to be able to deliver your product or your services to the end customer. The second one is the law of the customer. So in an agile organization, what you would see is there is a passion that is beyond extreme to the customer or the end user. And when I say end user, it's the user, the external user, the one who's buying your services or your products. And this is actually what is super interesting is how do you distinguish, how do you know actually when you enter an organization, how customer centric they are? Ask them how often they meet the customers. Ask them about persona, how they create them, how they co-create with customers. Try to really understand how they embed a customer-centric mindset in the organization. I'll give a specific example afterwards on customer centricity, which I really like. And the third one is the network. So this is where collaboration enters. In an agile organization, you usually have a flatter organization where people are connected throughout a network. So the work happens all across the board, meaning that you can have senior, junior people together, and you really establish a full network. We leverage a lot champions in Agile. We also leverage a lot ambassadors who can actually really infuse those behaviors throughout the organization. So the law of the small team. Typically what you would see is in an organization is you would have an org chart, you would have a top-down decision, and you would have individual responsibilities, which would result into siloed thinking or siloed working. Sometimes you even have, in the worst case scenarios, competing agendas. Like one team would not be aligned with the OKRs or goals with another team. That's generally a very schematic overview of what a bureaucratic team would look like. On the right, what you see is an agile team, is where you have an autonomous cross-functional team who's aligned actually to an outcome. The cross-functional element is really important, which means, for example, in a squad, if you want to deliver a product, I'm going to take an example of my personal life. What I've seen in the past as a consultant is there's this financial services company that I know. They wanted to deliver a new product for a digital product for their customers. What they did is they put a squad together, and in the squad, what they needed somebody from the customer department who was close enough to the customer to understand the needs. They needed someone from marketing to market this. They needed a couple of UX designers, but also analytics people to understand how much traction that this will get, to do the analysis of the usage. They also needed a few technology people, so software engineers to develop the app. All of that, they were actually in a squad, and usually a squad has a nickname, so they name themselves after a specific name who they can choose. It's absolutely free for it's how they would it's part of a ritual where they choose a name, and they would refer themselves to that team, and that team reports basically into the same bubble, which is basically a squad. So it's a really interesting way to see that because it gets actually your products much faster to the end customer. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat as we go along the way. The law of the customer is one that I've mentioned actually earlier on. There is one example that I will give. A company like Amazon is a good example for in terms of customer centricity. What they do as a rule is everyone at Amazon, regardless of your level, whether you're a senior executive or you are actually a sales representative, you need to talk to the customer, the ones buying actually their products and their services, at least once a year. And usually it's 2 days. So it's part of your annual curriculum. What you'll need to do as part of your learning experience, you'll spend actually 2 days a year answering, for example, phone calls, doing site visits, if you're delivering actually with some people, just making sure that you interact on a regular basis with customers. What is the rationale here? The rationale is that you understand how actually things happen on the floor and on the ground, and that you stay as close as possible to the customer. There is another company I know, it's in the retail industry. In the retail industry, what they do is every time they hire someone at a senior management level above, they actually make sure that part of the onboarding, they spend at least 1 month in a retail agency, or what would you call it, a retail shop rather. And so what they would do is they would ask actually the person to be 1 week, the first week, a salesperson. The second week, responsible for a specific department of the sales store. The third week to be the department store, and then the fourth week actually the regional department store manager. So you'll get to see all of the challenges that you can have as a cashier, as a salesperson, but also as a manager. This is true customer centricity, because you want to make sure that everyone who is within your company gets as close as possible to the end customer. Now, you might say, I work in HR, my customer is the employee. I work for the organization. Well, that is only partially true. Your end customer is actually your external customer. What your internal employees are, they're stakeholders. They're obviously people that are users of what you develop. So what is super important is never to forget that you have end customers that you also need to talk to. And even as an HR function, it's something that is super important to keep doing on a regular basis. The third one was the law of the network. I won't dwell too much on this one because it speaks for itself. Essentially, in agile organizations, you have this kind of network. Everyone actually is connected with everyone. And here you will hear terminologies like guilds or communities of practice, where people come together, where they share the same skill set and they stay connected and they still learn from each other. So the agile network is definitely out there in a very organic way, how people are connected to each other. All right, I promised that I would spend also some time on giving tips and concrete things that you can work with to go back to your teams and start deploying and leveraging some of these agile tools. So let's talk a little bit about Kanban, stand-ups, and retrospectives. So remember, the first tip that I shared is a team that is completely new to agile. Share the Agile HR Manifesto if you're working in HR with the team, and discuss it together with the team, and have a really good discussion, not a 5-minute conversation, but a real discussion where you spend a deep dive on all values and principles. The goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to have a reaction and an open discussion around the manifesto. So tip number 2, if this works, there you go. You'll need to visualize your work. There you go. You'll need to have a visualization board. So in Agile, what we do is we want to control actually your flow. Your flow is basically the work that you have in progress, the work that you have in your pool or in your to-do list, and the work that is done. The flow is the speed at which you move things around. So if you have something in your to-do list, how long does it take for you to get on average from your to-do list over the finishing line, over done? So depending on the task, sometimes it can be very quick, sometimes it can take a lot of time. That's why we take an approximate average. Why is this important? It allows you, first of all, to visualize the work that is out there, where everyone is working on. So let's assume that you are in a squad called Northwind Traders. The Northwind Traders are a specific squad on marketing, and they have a Kanban boards which they use planners on Teams. So what they did is they basically developed 3 columns, which you can see here: the to-do, the in progress, and complete. And a team that has never used a visualization board before, or has never really experimented with a visualization board, I'd always recommend to start with something basic, with 3 lines, columns maximum, or maximum 4. To do, in progress, complete. Keep it as simple as possible. The goal is for you to start learning and experimenting with the team to see how they learn the tool and whether it makes sense. I'm taking here a specific example, which is Planner, which actually I started using recently with our own team at PepsiCo. So What we did is a planner has got this functionality that you can integrate into Teams, and you've got basically different post-its. Here, what you see, select photo shoot location, is actually a task that rolls up into a bigger task, which is essentially actually your project. What is in progress is what you see here, approved PO for a photographer. You also have someone who is assigned to it. So when you click on the post-it, what you can do is you can assign someone actually to the task, and the person gets an automatic notification and knows actually when opening the post-it what is ultimately that needs to happen. And once the task is complete, you actually drag it down to complete. And then as you can see, it's scratched, which means that this is actually what you've got over the finishing line. So it's always interesting because one thing that I often was getting as a question is, what are all the things that your team has delivered over the last year? And it's generally for recognition purposes, also to make sure that we make progress. This is super easy to get if you do this on a regular basis together with your team. The only thing that you have to do is look at your boards and say, well, those are all the things that we have actually delivered with the team. So why is this important in terms of visualization? Visualizing your flow and how you move things around is a super important thing. But there is also another important thing, which is basically understanding actually whether there are any pain points on specific tasks. So let's assume, for example, get Gordon to send out final catalog copy to approve, stays in the to-do list for weeks and nothing is moving around. There is a genuine question on what is blocking and preventing actually for this to go in progress or incomplete. And we might say, well, Gordon is actually out of office for the next 2 weeks, and that's why we couldn't get it out. Well, your job as a manager or coach or even facilitator or scrum master, what you can do is say, what alternative do we have? Can we send it to someone else besides Gordon? And you would get actually someone else's input. It's important that you engage in those conversations, especially if you work with teams that are cross-functional, so that you keep having visibility into how things are evolving. Also, tasks here are very basic. Sometimes tasks are complex. So let me give another example. You need to do a benchmark study on what external companies are doing in terms of talent acquisition for hiring a specific profile. This is not an easy task. It's not something that you can do in 5 minutes. So you want to break it down into further tasks. Saying you could, for example, say, I'm going to ask 2-3 companies, FMCG companies, which are in the industry to get those insights. Someone else is going to leverage LinkedIn Insights, and we will ask the talent acquisition team to help us with that. Someone else will leverage the network and will go to different industries. So you want to break it down into tasks that can be divided so that you actually regroup together as a team. What's important is that if you open those stickies, that you have a status update right away. So you know actually where this stands. So meaning, for example, if there is something that is preventing me to move forward, the team member will go into the tool and just type it out there so that you can have updates real time. I'm just going to pause here for a second to see if this makes sense. Thumbs up if it does. Yeah, great.
Yep.
There are many tools. How many of you guys have been using and what tools have been using for visualization boards? Can you guys type them into the chat? What tools, Kanban tools, have you been using to visualize your flow? Trello, Asana. Yeah, Trello is a very basic one, obviously. Notion. Great. So often what I observe is in teams that are new to Agile, they're really good at using Trello within their respective team. What I see is a bit missing is when they partner with the business. So this is a very important point because we often think about, well, our HR team is using it, so it should be good. But remember what we said earlier on, autonomous teams, cross-functional, aligned to an outcome. The business should actually also be actively involved in those boards. So starting with your HR team is a good start, but you also want to make sure that if you develop actually products that are for the business, which you probably are doing anyway, you want them to have access as well so that they visualize your flow at the same time. There might be questions around confidentiality, etc., but you need to set the rules with your team around that. Is what is confidential? What do you want to put out there? What don't you want to put on the Kanban board? All right, so that was tip number 2, is using a Kanban board. I like Trello, by the way. I also think that it's a tool that is very handy and practical. Just bear in mind, it's a non-protected tool in most cases, unless you have the license, which means that it's easily accessible and for breach. Again, I think it's just something that you want to run by your corporate teams. If you work for large-scale organizations, what is the best tool for you to leverage? I've used Trello in the past, I use Planner now, and I think there are a number of great tools out there. Tip number 3, daily stand-ups. How many of you practice stand-ups on a regular basis? By show of hands or in the chat? How often do you, yeah, Carlos? As well. Awesome, we have a few. So what is the goal of a stand-up? A stand-up is basically a meeting where you come together and you want to make sure that your squad or your team is progressing towards the goals that you have set together. So there is a part of inspection. There is also a part of transparency. Is everyone on the team synced and up to date on what work that's been already done and what work still needs to be completed? So you want to make sure that everyone is on the same page and has the visibility into what's going on as a project as a whole. This is also super important for you to give visibility into your senior stakeholders. I'll give a specific example, as sometimes I feel that we spend a lot of time in steercos and updating actually executives around the work that we're doing. By giving some of your executives access to the tool, they can have a real-time update on where the project stands and how you progress towards the goals and what challenges you have, as long as you explain how the tool works. And this gives you transparency throughout the organization to everyone, meaning that you wouldn't need to get an email in the evening saying, what's the status of this on this? Well, it's on the tool. It's actually real life updates on a daily basis. So the latest information is out there. If you need something else, happy to provide it, but you already have access to that. You also want the team to adapt, because we have priorities that are sometimes changing or that need to be adjusted in light of what's going on. So there's always a question that you want to ask is, do we need to adjust something? And the blockers, your role as an Agile coach or an Agile facilitator is to make sure that you identify impediments. Is there anything blocking actually for this project to move forward? Typically, we ask 3 questions in a daily stand-up. What did you do since last we met? What will you do till we meet again? And what, if anything, is blocking your progress? And we usually ask a 1-minute update. So, and no more than 1 minute, because you usually have stand-ups on a regular basis. And people actually give, well, nothing blocking. This is what I did since last time we met. Next time I'm going to work with someone else on this project or on this task, and that's it. What you want to do is you want to make sure that your visualization board is out there. So for example, if you use Trello, which seems to be the case for many of our users, you want to open up Trello and view actually the work, the flow together, and make sure that things are updated on a regular basis. The frequency is at least once a week. Normally in Agile, there is a principle that encourages people to have daily stand-ups, that we work on a daily basis together. That is up to you to decide together with the team on what makes most sense. Often we forget that Agile is a mindset, is a way of working. It gives you guidelines that make generally sense, obviously, but that also need to be adapted to your reality. Tip number 4. What is a retrospective? A retrospective is something that I really enjoy, by the way, because I think it's super insightful. It's a session for the team to regularly reflect on practices, teamwork, achievements, and failures, with the aim of identifying and committing to actionable improvements. So it's really helpful to do retrospectives together with your team and to ask them actually very basic questions and in an open setting and reflect back actually to the work that you guys have done. I'll give a few specific examples. This is from the 12th principle, agility principle, by the way. It's reflect on behavior, adapt your behavior on a regular cadence to become more effective. One tool that I like using quite a bit is Ideaboards. It's a free tool. It's online. It's ideaboards.com. I'm sure that some of you might have heard or used this tool. You can actually program the tool in literally less than 1 minute. What you put is the title of what you want to do the retrospective on. I have 3 questions here as part of the retrospective. That was an annual retrospective. What went well in 2021 and that we should keep on doing, basically? What would we do differently? And what are your hopes for 2022? When I did this retrospective actually with one team, there are some very interesting ideas that have come up, but also similarities. You can click on the plus button and then you'll see a sticky. So you'll have lights post-its. And what you want to do is you want to collate the post-its that group together. So if you have 2 ideas that are similar, what you would do, you would drag and drop, and they would merge together into one post-it. And finally, what is really interesting with the tool is that it gives you the ability to vote on post-its. So normally what we would do in real life, and hopefully one day we will go back post-pandemic to being fully in the office and collaborating also in a different setting. But if you're in a hybrid mode or in a remote mode, what you would do is you would have those post-its and you would ask people to vote. So for example, if you have 5 people on your team, you can say, at the end, we won't be able to discuss all of the ideas out there. This vote to the top 2 ones that you want to discuss as a team. And so people would start voting, they would give 2 votes, and then you would only discuss actually the top 2. It's in the essence of time and making sure that you focus your conversation on the 2 items that are perceived as being most valuable to be discussed by the team. Here again, it gives you a little bit of insights into how you might actually work. There are other tools out there for retrospectives. Can you put in the chats what tools you might have used in the past for retrospectives? Oh, lessons learned. Yeah, we have the 4 L's actually. Learned, liked, loved, lacked. That's a really nice one. I think you can use that as a triangle, for example. After action reviews, absolutely. That's also a good one. Mural is more of a design thinking tool. For those of you who are familiar with Mural, is actually a really nice one. I really like it. I also think it requires a little bit more skill sets to use Mural than to use Ideaboards. You need to be trained on the topic. Does anyone know Retro? I'll just put it on the chat. This one is a very popular one. I recommend this one also to use because it's fun and it also comes with preloaded questions. So for example, just to make this fun, you'll have something called the Marie Kondo retrospective. So most of you guys are from Spain. You would know the reference. Marie Kondo is basically the woman who basically folds things and gets a lot of space saved in when actually arranging her stuff. So the questions are geared towards that, is how do you save space? How do you actually make the most out of it? And so it's a fun way actually to also run a retrospective. So there are different ways to do that. Retro.io is a good one. I always recommend again here with tools and process and tools that you want to leverage. If you want to do things that include some confidentiality or things that use a license tool from advised by your tech department, just to make sure that that the tool is also secure. Ideaboards is great for fun brainstorming and also basic retrospectives that don't include confidential information. Oh, and I forgot one last thing. An ideas board, you can export basically your post-its. You can export them in an Excel, or you can also export them as a PDF. In both cases, you'll be able to send it to your team and actually say, these are the things that we voted on. The Excel is really nice because you can rearrange them actually with the highest votes to the lowest votes. I do want to allow sufficient time for questions. And so I'm just going to end this with where you start. So 5 tips on my end is number 1 is meet the teams where they are. It's better to start actually with small things and to understand where they are in terms of maturity, agile maturity, and agile knowledge, than trying to do actually all at once. So starting with the manifesto is a great way to start. If they're already familiar with the manifesto and you've already discussed it, then you can move on to the next step. But start always with the basics and with the mindset and the principles. Second is discuss the mindset. So discussing the mindset is around, remember the 3 laws of Agile, the law of the cross-functional team, the law of customer, and the law of the network. Those are things that really actually show the mindset of an organization. Discuss these openly with your team and ask yourself, what are the things that we can actually do to get there if we're not there yet? Start small. It's better to start with 1 or 2 things, like for example, saying we're going to use a visualization board like Kanban, and we're going to do that, give it a shot, and we'll keep it this very basic. Start small and make sure that you do regular retrospectives to see how the team feels about it. Because it's likely that you will change actually boards at some point. And true Agile team starts with 1 visualization board and at some point realizes that that no longer meets their needs. So they go into different boards. Experiment and celebrate small wins. You want to make sure that you experiment actually with Agile as much as possible, and that you celebrate also some successes, and set expectations along the way. I always ask this as a question, as a quiz question, but to go from a forming team, a team that has just been formed, to a high-performing Agile team, it takes you at least 15 to 18 months. So it's something to take into account. It's not overnight that you're going to get there, and that's okay. That's part of the journey. So I wanted to thank you guys and open it up for questions.
Yes, well, let's see.
Maybe it was crystal clear. So if you have a question, you can unmute.
Yeah, for sure. As well, if you want to put it on the chat, I can read it.
Yusuf, this is Teresa.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi, pleasure to have you on this video that we are holding here. And tell us which are the challenges that you have faced whenever you had to implement this kind of agile projects.
What are the challenges that I faced?
Yeah.
I think there are a few. So thanks for the question, because I think it's a really good one, right? As in terms of challenges that you face, I think the first challenge that you face is that you want to go too fast and try to do too many things at the same time. It's better to really pick one for teams that are completely new to Agile, to start with one thing. So in the past, I've tried actually doing Kanban, Agile Manifesto, retrospectives, everything at once, and you realize that does not necessarily answer to the team's needs. I've also learned actually from some mistakes that I made in the past. I led sessions that were too complex for people that were completely new to Agile in terms of how you build goals. You have OKRs, and not everybody has to work with objective key results, for example. So you want to make sure that you meet the team where they are. So designing a session that is preferably actually easier for the team to learn from is going to be absolutely key in your first steps in agility. Once the team is mature, you can test things out. So there I would recommend go, design even more complex sessions, invite customers externally. You can basically open up things much more. Does that answer your question, Teresa? Yeah, thank you. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you, Yusuf.
All right.
I know. Well, Yusuf, I have another question actually as well. We are working in recruiting. I believe Agile differs a lot from the different areas of HR as well. But specifically for recruiting, what would you suggest? What would be your suggestions on working Agile in recruiting, headhunting? At least, where should we start?
Well, I think the same principles, values and principles apply regardless of the area that you work in, right? So knowing your end customer is going to be absolutely key. And a lot of the things that you may be doing already now might be actually already aligned with the agile mindset and principles and values. So you want to assess on what are the things that you're doing today versus the agility mindset. I'll give specific examples. For example, we want to make sure that we actually put at the heart the customer, the end customer. When you recruit as a headhunter or as an agency or even as a TA team, you want to make sure that you understand fully what the person is going to do and how that person is going to interact with end customers and stakeholders. So almost living actually in the daily, putting yourself into daily shoes of the person who is going to get the job. A good practice of a company I know is that what they do is in TA, they shadow actually for a full day someone who is very similar to the level. So it could be even senior positions. You shadow for an entire day rather than just doing an intake session in terms of what are the things that are important to you, etc. No, you actually shadow the person for a full day or someone who is in a similar role to understand what those true needs are. That is one tip that I can give. On the rest, I think you'll need to assess on where you stand in terms of maturity on agility from your perspective, because the journey is not going to be the same for you as it's going to be for a team that is already quite ahead of their agile journey.
I understand. Perfect. Thank you.
No worries.
I don't know if there are any more questions. As well, there was one question that Tony did before. Actually, when you were explaining the law of the network, the 4 diagram that you showed, he asked, "Is it a chaos?" Because there were a lot of lines, and he asked, "Is that just somehow chaos?" I don't know if you'd like to answer on that as well. It was on the chat before. I don't know where now.
Yeah, it's so just to be clear on the law of the network, there are 4 steps that were shown. You have a quite bureaucratic siloed organization, and then you have at the other side of the spectrum, teams that are fully connected between stakeholders, managers, and customers and employees all together. It may seem chaotic, but it's not, because you want to put some guardrails around how actually the connections work. So I'll give a few examples in terms of what you can do to put those guardrails together. First, you want to make sure that you have people with the same skill sets grouped together in some kind of a guild or a community of practice. So for example, if you're in a squad and you have analytics skills, you might say, I actually don't get to see my other analytics colleagues and I still need to be connected with them. So you create a group of a tribe of analysts that come together, or a community of practice, so that they can keep on learning. I'll give a specific example from my past life. I used to lead the people analytics team in one of the companies that I was at, and I was part of the analytics tribe, and yet I was part of the people HR function. And there I was also part with, actually, I worked very closely with the data scientists and analysts who were really curious about how we were calculating turnover and predicting actually churn in the future. So those are the things that you want to make sure that you keep track of, is on how do you actually establish those guardrails. I'll give a second and a third example is for the customer, you also want to have a framework. So a specific example for Amazon is you actually can talk to the customer, and you need to twice a year. That was a really good example in terms of how they make that happen. So you want to make sure that certain options are out there for your employees to make that happen. At Vistaprint, for example, what I did is I actually joined our customer care. I went to Montego Bay, where we had one of our customer care centers, and I listened actually to the calls and answered together with the customer service specialist to the calls of the customer. So you don't do that in isolation, but you need a framework. And the third one that I would give is organic networks already happen. What you're doing is you're enabling those connections more throughout a guardrail and a framework than anything else. So I would encourage you actually to keep having those organic connections in the organization. Does that answer your question, Tony?
Yes. Actually, I've been working in quite classic organizations, and when I wrote for Equal Chaos, it was a way of putting in a perspective that going too fast from a classic bureaucracy to a service-driven, customer-driven organization without maturity, without education, without time, it's a sensible point. I didn't know what was Agile. well, I had heard about it, but I've been working as an agile organization in some projects, particularly in spot teams, and particularly with young people, and particularly in services rather than in industry. When you have factories in the middle, it's more difficult because there is regularity, there is really a bureaucracy system. I don't mean that it's not possible, but it's quite more difficult. I think it's much more appropriate for services area of the company.
Yeah, it's a really good observation. I think there what you're mentioning, there's certainly some truth of it because of how regulated your company might be, or certain areas or certain functions. I always challenge that also in a very healthy way, is on saying, well, maybe actually there are some regulations, but it's fine as long as we have a freedom within a framework and we define that freedom within a framework. I'll give a specific example from my life. In certain countries, we have very heavily regulated works councils and unions. France is one of them, actually. And often when I say, well, we can do that actually in certain countries, people say, well, it's heavily regulated, you won't be able to do that. I challenge them. I say, well, no, we can actually do it. I did recently a retrospective with our works councils. So it gives you an idea about, even with works councils and unions, you can actually do it. So I'd encourage you also to challenge that while keeping, a little bit of progress, step by steps. It's more baby steps that you're taking. Exactly, smaller chunks than a big change.
Perfect. We have another question from Gabriela that says, how do you encourage Agile when working on a fully remote environment with your team? And as well, Angela asked, is it easier now that it's more remote to implement Agile? Is it more difficult than when we were more at the office?
Yeah. So thanks, Gabriela, for the question. If you're in a fully remote environment, actually nowadays, since the pandemic, I think we're all a bit used to be able to work at least in a remote way. It's leveraging the technology as much as possible. So if you have access to the current technology, what you want to do is you'll still want to have a visualization board that is online. Frankly, in the past, I've used physical boards, so literally physical boards for Agile. I don't think I can do that anymore, because at some point, someone in the team will be working from home, and that's okay. So we have all gone online, and we'll need to leverage actually the online tools. What I think is going to be a little bit more challenging if your team is fully remote in different locations is to build actually relations of trust and making sure that you spend time in discussing behaviors, mindsets, how you actually operate as a team. So you need to spend more time on retrospectives with you as a team than in a team that sees each other on a regular basis, face to face. It's super important. And there we're a little bit out of Agile and more in terms of how you build high performing teams. The foundation of high performing teams is trust. That's actually the model of Lencioni. We use that also quite a bit in Agile. You want to make sure that that level of trust is out there, even with a fully remote team.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And Rosa Maria asks, can Agile working be implemented in any type of company, or there are some basic requirements to assure it will be successful?
It's actually a really good question. I think first of all, Agile is not the answer for everything, right? It's something that we also need to get it out there. There are certain things that you will want to use a different way of working. But to Keith's comment, actually, Agile is a mindset, and we've covered that earlier on as well. And making sure that you think about the mindsets mostly and the behaviors that you want to adopt. That mindset, you'll see that also in other ways of working or other basically frameworks. For example, Lean or Six Sigma or design thinking. All of these, they share one thing in common. It's the mindsets. It's actually the behaviors are very similar. Lean is around continuous improvement. Six Sigma is about improving quality. Design thinking is innovation in terms of customer centricity. All of these have a common mindset. What you want to do is to deploy that mindset. Whether you call it Agile or something else, frankly, actually, I don't really care, because what's important is that you deploy that mindset in a way that makes sense for you. And I'll end on a note. Agile is not a copy-paste. So what may work for you, Rosa Maria, might not work for someone else, and that's okay. So you need to figure out what makes most sense for your team, hence having those discussions. There will be trial and error, and you'll reach a conclusion by saying, this makes sense for us, but this doesn't make sense for Telefonica or for Santander or for any other company.
Of course.
Many thanks, Yusuf.
No worries.
Thank you. I don't know if there are any questions. Well,
yeah,
it's already 5 o'clock as well.
Hi, Yusuf. I have 3 questions, if I may. First of all, thank you very much for sharing your insights. The presentation was really insightful, and thank you also for your generosity, okay, and for your time. My first question is the following. I mean, speaking about mindset, normally what happens to us working in HR is that in several occasions, we normally have a tendency to implement the latest fad of the month or the latest hit of the month. And how do we make sure that we do not lose sight about what is really important, which is, working, partnering with a business to deliver and to support the achievement of these strategic objectives. And that would be my first question to you. How do you can suggest us to keep this proper balance? My second question is, which is the leading company in your opinion, obviously besides PepsiCo, where you work now, that you would say are world-class in implementing Agile in HR?
Yeah.
And my third question is, for those of us who could be interested in further exploring the Agile HR world, what would you recommend us in terms of either accreditation or some specific books, something like that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. I know we're a little bit over time. I'll take those questions. I think that will be the last one, right? Eva and Gloria, I'm just looking at you both. The 3 questions then essentially is, the first one is around making sure that we stay focused on the right things and the things that deliver most value to the organization. One of the principles of Agile is that you prioritize the work together. What does that mean? That means that you prioritize the work together with your customer and the people that you work with on a regular basis, including the business. This is one thing, a big pitfall that I see in the HR teams. What we do is we work within the HR team and we're going to prioritize our work. And I say, hang on, we're working with the business. They need to prioritize together with us, actually, the work that we will be doing. And sometimes it is inevitable that you'll have a delivery that is last minute, something that is a very important project. You'll actually need to make sure that you have a little bit of bandwidth to still keep that run the business functionality. But everything else, it means you actually either deprioritize or you give additional time or budgets. That's the triangle that you use for prioritization. You negotiate time, budget, or scope. There you go. So you either deliver something with a scope that is smaller while staying on time and budget, you ask for additional budget, or you review the time. That prioritization you need to do together with the business. It doesn't make sense to prioritize on your own, so that would be my first advice. If you pile up too much, prioritize together with the business. The second question is around leading companies around Agile. I think there are a number of them. So I'll give you actually examples of where you can find the latest research on Agile HR and Agile, because I think they're very valuable. I won't give companies' names out today because the list would not be exhaustive. But what I can tell you is Gartner has a specific dedication on Agile HR and very focused on what actually companies are best in class in Agile HR. If you are a member of Gartner, you can actually consult them very easily. There are also business cases. So they're literally business cases of 20 pages explaining what the company did from the beginning until the end. One of those business cases was one of the companies that I worked at, and it got published, so it's available on Gartner. The second source that you can use actually is also the Learning Consortium. The Learning Consortium is a group of basically Agile specialists that come together, and what they do is they write on Agile ways of working that are quite innovative. So you'll see also what companies are doing to keep customer centricity, small teams, and networks together. And those are very concrete. They're for free for consultation on Google. You can actually type them in. And then the last one that I'll give is if you type Agile HR in YouTube, you'll get actually real cases and examples and interviews of people that are applying Agile HR. I'll really like examples from the learning and development worlds because I think those are very concrete and tangible examples. You'll find some under the channel Agile HR on YouTube. And then to your last question, there are several books. I'll recommend actually 2 books that I like. One book is Agile People. It's called it's written by Pia Mia. She's Swedish. She's an Agile coach. I really like her book because it's very simple to understand. Agile People. It got published years ago. And another one that I like that was published recently by my friends Natal Dank and Rina. They published a book called Agile HR, and so it's also available, I believe, on Amazon. And in terms of accreditations, I think there are many out there. So if you start with those, I think that would be a great start.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Yusuf, for all the questions answered and for all the session, for all the insights on everything that you explained to us. It was very interesting. And thank you to everyone that was here today.
Thank you. Have a great one. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.